And welcome back to the Priesthood Dispatches channel. This evening we're joined by Clayne Edward Wayman, all the way from the United States. Before we get to Clayne's story, you could support the channel by liking, subscribing, and hitting the little bell button so you never miss one of these interesting after-dinner chats. In other news, down in the description below, you can find a link to the tips page if you are feeling so inclined. There's also Priesthood Dispatches merchandise, and you can also find a great link to Clayne's website, Vesper Life, where you can read more about him and about, his great outlook on life and more about what we're going to find out. So, Clayne, hello.
Hello, PDs. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, awesome. So many people will have read the description already. And Clayne, you come from a very kind of, when I say secretive part of Mormonism, Mormonism's just really secretive anyway. They say it's sacred, but it's really secret. And they pride themselves on their secret meetings. But
oh, you are so correct.
you grew up as number 4 of 45 siblings, which is unreal, because you grew up in a branch of the FLDS church called the Work of Christ.
The Work of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and your mum was the first wife of your father.
Yeah.
And how many wives in total did, I guess, your dad have?
He had, growing up, I had 4, and he just barely married his 5th.
Wow.
And I haven't met her yet.
Is she young?
No, he actually married a gal that was from the mainstream of FLDS, who was already, she left that branch, and she already had 14 kids. And I heard that she's 52. So it's pretty rare to marry a woman in that age range. Usually they're, 18 or early 20s.
Oh my gosh. So she already had 14 kids. Do you count them now as siblings? So you've gone from 45 to like 59?
Yeah, technically. I guess that marriage just happened about a month ago, and I've never met her or anything.
Wow.
So I wasn't invited to any of the stuff. So
yeah, that's sorry about that.
And actually, it's a celebration. I like to be invited, but I don't like to go.
Sounds like every family event I've ever been to. Oh my gosh, awesome! So you saying that she's from the main branch of FLDS, and so what's the difference? Like, how does it break down? Are there sects within the FLDS?
Well, they consider themselves independent of FLDS. So are you okay if I go back and give a tiny bit of history on where the breakoff comes from and all that? Okay, I'm happy to. All right. So the breakoff comes from, there was a guy in the 1920s by the name of John Woolley and Lauren Woolley, and they were the ones who led the FLDS movement, the Fundamentalist movement. Well, according to their narrative, in 1886, John Taylor, who was the president of the mainstream LDS at the time, according to the 1886 revelation that the foundation of FLDS is based on, it says that during this time there's all this upheaval about, hey, the government's going to come in and seize church property if they don't abolish polygamy.
Yeah.
And so there was this manifesto that was presented to John Taylor. And John Taylor says, according to this story, I'll take it up to the Lord. Well, at the time, John Woolley was the bodyguard. And according to his story, he says that night, about 9:30, there was this huge beam of light. It was beaming under the door, and he heard and he was supposed to make sure nobody would enter the room. John Taylor was on the hunt by this time by government authorities for practicing polygamy. And so John Taylor regularly had bodyguards. John Woolley at the time was one of them, watching out for him. And apparently, according to the story, he had some kind of visitation with the already dead Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ, according to woolly story. And when he came out of the room, there commenced an 8-hour meeting where he gathered, I think it was only a handful of people. I think it was, I don't have the exact count. I think it was like 20 or so. And there was like this 8-hour meeting that took place. And during this time, this is, you talk about secrets. This is such a perfect segue. This is where the 1886 revelation, you could search it online. It's basically a revelation that claims that John Taylor wrote, or they found a copy of this revelation in his desk after he died, but it was never signed, and it was never presented to the main body of the church. So the whole story of the 1886 is the mainstream of the church was in apostasy because they're trying to give up one of the crowning principles, plural and celestial marriage. And so there was this secret underground movement that we know today as the fundamentalist movement. And so the FLDS are the ones who broke off from the mainstream, and it was stayed underground until about the 1920s. So a lot of these people would be FLD part of the movement, but then during the day they would pretend to be part of the mainstream church. Yeah. So all of FLDS trace their roots back to this 1886 revelation thing. And so what's happened is so there was this group of people with the fundamentalist movement that formed, and in 1983, the version that I was raised with broke off from that mother body or father body, whatever you want to call it, of FLDS, and formed their own version of what they think that the fullness of the gospel is.
Okay.
And so that version is known today as the work of Jesus Christ, or they call it the work for short.
So did you have, I guess, prophets, seers, and revelators at the head of the church?
They were, yes, they had the prophets, but the prophets they don't call them prophets. They call them presidents of priesthood or apostles. And there's the head guy, and he's considered the president of priesthood. And he, but they, like I said, they don't use the word prophet.
What I love is that, and I'll be corrected in the comments if I'm wrong, but if that's the 1886 revelation, as you said, where they met with the dead Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ, then that is almost the most recent visitation, more recent than anything in the mainstream Mormon church has had, kind of by decades, since Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery meeting with resurrected beings in the Nauvoo Temple. But so Doug's asked a question. Clayne, was the Adam God doctrine taught in the FLDS?
Absolutely. It was a cornerstone teaching. 100%.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Adam is our God and our Father. And according to that narrative, and want me to go into it? I could go into it. Yeah.
Let's do it. You know what,
Doug? That's a fun one.
In our side of things, whenever you mention Adam God, people have been excommunicated for teaching Adam God. And
that's unbelievable. So, I don't know if your audience is familiar with the Journals of Discourses. The Journals of Discourse, the Journals of Discourses are one of the forbidden books by the mainstream of the LDS Church. But those were cornerstone books for all the fundamentalists. Now, there's also other groups of fundamentalists or FLDS that have already broken off. I've heard that there's like 19 subsects of Mormonism. I only know of a handful, but the Adam God doctrine was a cornerstone piece to what I was taught. I was taught that God, our God, I guess who we report to, so to speak, was already exalted. He'd earned his salvation, and he fell so that man might be. And so, I was told that the word Eve, like Eve in the Garden of Eden, meant many, and Eve was a word of the Adamic language. And the word Eve in the Adamic language implied many, and so it wasn't just our God and one lady; it was a God and a few of his wives. That's the
Wow.
narrative that's the narrative I was given.
That's a new one on me. The Eve meaning many thing. I've heard the I guess outside Mormonism, there's the stories of Lilith being Adam's
I didn't
first
hear about
wife.
Lilith until late. Yeah, I never was ever taught anything about Lilith until my research outside of Mormonism. Then I discovered Lilith, which is a fascinating story.
So you're part of this massive family and living in Colorado City.
So the main headquarters is 5 miles south of Colorado City in a little town called Centennial Park. And I was raised in the Salt Lake Valley area, even though the main headquarters was there in Arizona. So I was raised in Utah. Okay. So Utah and Arizona are neighboring states. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that I've seen a lot of recently and watched a lot of are some of these, I guess, documentaries where they speak about escaping polygamy. And they show girls that are previous FLDS or another polygamous branch of the church going in to, I guess, free other young ladies or whatever, and then rushing around because the bishop's coming or there's guys coming with guns and different things like that to stop them. Would that be is that just an over dramatization?
I'm not familiar with the guns part. I will tell you there was a little bit of a conversation. It's part of those hush secret conversations about blood atonement type of things, which that's a whole nother area I could get into. But if somebody wants to leave, at least the work that I was raised in, pretty much anybody can leave. And I've never heard of people at gunpoint, although there could be isolated cases. It wouldn't be at the church level. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
I think their teachings are so, I mean, they indoctrinate them from the moment they're born all the way through adulthood that
absolutely.
It's hard for anyone to get out.
Laura's asking in the comments if you have a sense of how many independent Mormon fundamentalists there are outside of the US.
You know what? I'm really not privy to that, although I am familiar with a small group in Canada. Winston, you can look him up. He got prosecuted in Canada a few years ago for living polygamy. He was part of the FLDS branch, and he went over there. There's also been some in Mexico. Yeah, so there is some in Mexico I'm familiar with as well. So Mexico, Canada. Other than that, outside of the U.S., I'm not really familiar. If I were to put a number on it, I would say maybe a few thousand.
Yeah, I guess I'd heard that the Canada and Mexico kind of connection was more of a connection to get around US law.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to Canada to get married or going to Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's still people that live out there. They're living polygamy.
Yeah. So you grew up. Was it a situation where you each had, or each mother had a house with her children, and dad just went from house to house, or?
So I heard of stories that way, that was the case, but my story was not that. And I would probably say it's probably because of finances. So all of us lived in one house, all the wives, all the kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah.
That must have been a massive house.
It wasn't. It wasn't. No? It was no. It was so. It was only like a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house.
Wow. So what was?
And then when I turned 18, my dad started an addition when I was 16, and the addition was finished right around. Well, I guess the addition was finished right around when I was 17, 18 years old, something like that, and that addition more than doubled the house. And I moved away. I got married at 21, and I moved away when I was 22. I'm 38 now. And so I would say I was raised with about in the neighborhood of 32 to 35 of my siblings.
In a 5-bedroom house?
In a 5-bedroom house, yeah.
Well,
oh yeah, so bunk beds. Bunk beds were top currency.
And did you have your own bed, or more than one person to a bed?
Yeah, we all had our own little bunk bed space.
Okay.
So lucky for me, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Like for example, my little bed space was you have the front living room, and the front living room, one half of it was boarded off so that like 6 or 8 of us could be inside this one half of the living room with the bunk beds. And then it'd be pretty common to have kids that'd be sleeping on the floor in the living room or in the bedrooms if there wasn't enough beds.
I can imagine that with that many kind of kids there, you have some siblings that you're actually close with in kind of a sibling relationship, and then possibly others who are almost like classmates, maybe. Or were you able to? Because you won't see everyone every day, I'm assuming. If you're all
when I got older, that would probably be a correct statement. But growing up, we saw everybody at the breakfast table, and we saw everybody for the most part at the lunch table and also for dinner.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I struggle to get my 2 kids to come to the table for dinner.
Well, you got to try the Board of Education, which is this big old wrought iron stick or a branch off a tree, my dad's belt. So
you know what, with the same age, Clayne, and I'm getting to the point where I'm saying to my kids, you know what? When I was young, like,
I know,
my dad had hit me. Exactly. My dad had take his slipper out or whatever, and they're like, why? Why would he do that? Because it's the way it was.
We're getting smacked around was just a normal thing.
Yeah.
So that's how we all got to the table. You either come or get beat.
Okay.
The choice is yours.
Fair enough. It seems like a good way to go. No, it doesn't. I am not in any way condoning child abuse. Please, let's rewind. It seems awful. So there was 3 other wives in the home aside from your mother. How did you address them?
We addressed them by calling them mother and their first name. So if their first name was Valate, for example, we'd call them Mother Valate, or if their name was Anna, we'd call them Mother Anna. And then I'd often call my mother Mother. We didn't call them Mom. Mom was considered a word of the Gentiles, and so we had to address them Mother, and we called Father as respect as well. In my family, it was forbidden to call him Dad. That was also another Gentile word.
Okay, so did everyone call him Father?
Yes, everyone in the house called him Father.
Okay. And we've seen the FLDS women in their prairie star dresses. Was that a dress code that was with yourselves as well?
To a certain extent, yes. It wasn't as strict as Warren Jeff's version, where he had to have certain colors and certain styles. They were allowed to. The point of it is the garments went all the way to the wrist right here, and then all the way down to the ankles. And so you had to wear something long enough for both the men and the women to cover the garments.
Yeah, I think we'll get onto that in a little while. We'll rewind a little bit. So, growing up in that house, you went to school, or was it a kind of a compound situation?
Compound situation, you could call it. I was homeschooled. My dad built a schoolhouse that was just right next to the house on the property. I was raised on a small family farm, and right next we had a little schoolhouse, and we did school right there.
Wow. And did you do all the grades? Was it a normal kind of process?
I wouldn't They tried to be normal, but it wasn't normal. For me, I was pulled out of school at 13 to go work full time. And in addition, take care of the farm. And also then during the summer, especially because I was pulled out of school to go do flat work concrete with an uncle. And obviously I got behind on my school, but eventually, so what would happen is the kids, they would teach to about 8th grade, and then the kids would get their GED. They do their own GED. But for me, I wanted a high school diploma. And so one of my plumber friends introduced me to this correspondence class or school from Pennsylvania. And I found a way to pay for that. I'd sell things on the side, like canned fruit out of our cellar or whatnot, to pay for the tuition to pay for my high school.
Wow.
And so I did. I graduated on time doing it that way.
That's amazing, because I think I struggled just doing school anyway without having to pay for tuition or find a separate school. I'm assuming that was quite under the table maybe deal. Don't let dad see you stealing the
oh yeah, totally, because all the money that we made working for my uncle, all that money went to my father.
Okay. So how many times a week would you go to church?
So the main headquarters in Centennial Park is weekly, but where I was in Salt Lake City, they only met monthly. They did priesthood meeting on a Saturday night, and then did Sunday. They did once, then they did that. They did the general meeting for everybody. And it was usually done at my grandfather's house. He's also one of the apostles. He's got 12 living wives today. He's 95. He'll be 96 here in the end of December.
Wow.
Yeah. And so during those weeks that we didn't have church, my father would hold a Sunday school, or sometimes my grandfather would hold family Sunday schools. We'd go to his house for Sunday schools. So there was something, even though we didn't do official church every Sunday, there's usually some kind of church activity on Sunday, whether it was a family Sunday school, or one of my mothers would read to us, or my dad would read to us some kind of sermon, or we went to church.
Okay. So I've never, in the mainstream Mormon church as such, you go through to, as a young man, to receive the Aaronic priesthood at age 12 and become a deacon, then a teacher at 14 and a priest at 16. Is that the same, or what's the priesthood progression?
Yeah. So it was a little bit some families, they could do things a little different. There wasn't like a golden standard. They usually would have a priesthood holder. So there's a pecking order of priesthood, right? And so I think to bring context to this, I should show you my pecking order, if you will. So okay. In my family, the pecking order is important to who gets to be ordained and stuff. So my pecking order was my dad, and then my dad was connected to his father, which happened to be one of the apostles. And then he was in connection with the head apostle, who was supposedly in connection with the apostles who had died, who were all the way connected to Jesus Christ, type of thing. Joseph Smith, Jesus Christ. And so my grandfather was like the patriarch of my family. And so he would make a recommendation when it was time to be ordained.
Okay.
And so it was pretty common that he would wait till you were older, like 14 instead. So it's quite often that he would skip deacon and all the way go to priest. And so at 14, I was ordained priest. And then when I turned 18, I was ordained an elder, became part of the elders quorum.
Okay. And did they still have the distinction between the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. And so the next thing I guess I want to get onto is, what do weddings look like? Again, comparing in the United States, the mainstream LDS church, they attend these big, obviously expensive temples with their temple recommends, and they're sealed in celestial marriage there, or a version of celestial marriage as they currently have it. Yeah. But for yourselves, what's the process if you're say your dad took, as you said, another wife not so long ago,
Mhm.
what would the
Yep.
process be for that wedding?
So behind the scenes, before my dad knows anything about it, the priesthood council, which is the apostles, the head of the church, they would be in collaboration with each other, and then there would be one of those. There was 6 of them. They've actually called other guys, from what I've heard, but they would talk to the girl, and so the priesthood council would talk directly with the girl and work out who they're going to marry. And then once they have come to an agreement that it's going to be, like, we'll say my dad, for example, then they would call my dad and say, hey, we have a girl that we have for you. And this is her name. We recommend you get in touch with her. And so he would often get in touch with her. The marriage that I'm in right now, I was arranged. I could tell you my firsthand experience of my own marriage. I've been married twice from the church. But then the church would contact the guy, who's, in this case, you're talking about my father. They'd contact my father, and then he would get together with her, and make sure they click. And and it wasn't any. It's usually not some kind of big courtship. It's more like, hey, the priest had said we should get together, so let's get together and
Wow.
let's do this.
So, if your dad chose not to, say he didn't, I guess, click, as you said, would he be looked down on by the priesthood?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when the priesthood give you have a wife for you, or give you they have an inspiration, you should marry somebody. When you say no to them, especially something like marriage, we were taught that you're effectively saying no to God.
Yeah, that's for us. I say for the mainstream, it was more a case of you could never say no to a calling because you're saying no to God. But it kind of ups the ante a bit when there's a wife and 14 children coming along with it.
Yeah, exactly. So
I was just going to say, so it's basically it's an arranged marriage by the
100%
priesthood,
arranged.
as you say.
Yeah, but it's an arranged marriage.
And if you want to move on, we can find some more pumpkin pie. But how does it go if you're not kind of sexually compatible with that person? If you're really not attracted to them, and the priesthood have kind of forced you on each other. Like, I'm not saying it must be awful for the sister as well. But where do you go with that? Is it a begrudging kind of? I don't know.
It's not relevant. They teach it like it's not even important. It's like, if you follow what God guides you to do, you'll find that attraction.
Because that's a big part of a marriage, you know. We teaching the church the whole point in marriage is to have children and to grow a seed, a righteous seed unto God, and different things. But not everyone's compatible in that. Someone in the Sarah asking what age are people when they enter an arranged marriage?
All right. So the answer to that, Sarah, is 2 answers. One is what they do currently, and the second answer is what they did previously.
Okay.
So Warren Jeffs right now, the leader of FLDS, he's behind bars right now. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life for underage, having sex with underage girls as early as 12 years old. So there's Warren Jeffs. So the work for the most part likes to make sure the girls are 18 years old. The work,
gosh,
when I'm referring to the work,
then.
No, 18. Okay. However, there have been many incidences where the girls are much younger than that. The youngest one that I have firsthand knowledge of was 15, and that I know of. I know of one at 15. I know of another in 6. I know a couple at 16 and 17 as well.
Does that become a proper, like, husband-wife sexual relationship, or is it more?
Well, in your wedding vow, you say you're going to multiply and replenish the earth, which implies we're going to go make some babies.
Okay. Which is illegal in the United States because under the age of 18, they're minors.
Yeah. Yes. There is a few things. If they're 16 and the man is within 10 years of that age, so he's 26 or less, let's say, then the parents of the legal guardians of the girl of the underage can consent to it. So it'd have to be a legal wedding. Okay. But if a 25-year-old or 24-year-old is having sex with a 16-year-old outside of marriage, then yeah, they could have some serious problems on their hands. And what I have to make clear is when it comes to Mormon polygamy, is there's usually only one wife that's the legal wife. And so if your plural wife is 16 years old, you could have a legal problem on your hand. And Warren Jeffs did, and many others as well. And so as Warren Jeffs in the early 2000s started getting in the news quite a bit, these other FLDS breakoffs really took notice, and they just including the version I was raised in, they just flat out, we're not going to prison over this thing. So we're going to stick to 18 years old. And so right now it's pretty hard and fast rule for that they should be 18. However, my first wife, I was 21 and she was 17. And what happened there was and I had not been married before. And so what happened there was the church leaders, before they would do their version of the marriage, they said, you two need to go get your legal marriage done. And so her mother went to the county and got the documents, and there was a legal marriage in place before they had any part into it. And so they like to track, make sure that but that was the first wife, and that's the luxury of being a first wife, is you can have that legal protection.
Okay. And did you know her before you were married?
Yes. So my first marriage, I was a little bit of her and I were somewhat, we'll call it rebels, if you will. And that is that we met each other before. I was 20, she was 16, and marriage was taught. You have to keep in mind, marriage was taught as early as you can hear teaching. And we thought we liked each other. And so we kind of had a year and a half of a long distance relationship. She lived in 300 miles away, but we talked on the phone on a regular basis, which was highly against the rules. And but we never had anything intimacy until after the priesthood marriage was done, which the legal one had to be done, then the priesthood marriage. So yeah.
What was there a time gap in between the legal and the priesthood?
Yeah, 3 weeks.
And you didn't live together for those 3 weeks?
Yeah, so the dates was December 17th was the legal one, and then we were married by the priesthood on January 9th.
Okay. So
however long that period is.
Yeah. Over here in the UK, we have to do a similar thing for different reasons. But it's usually a few hours, and there's usually a bit of a running joke that you don't let the bride and groom drive alone to the temple together, because they might stop off and do something bad before they have their priesthood wedding.
Right.
Yep. 3 weeks is pretty intense.
Oh yeah. So, but she lived 300 miles away, so she would just go home with her parents. So the temptation was really not there. But there was a moment after the legal wedding that we were able to go spend some alone time together. And when I was leaving, my dad said to me, "Now remember, Clayne, you're not married." And
wow.
Yeah. That's and even though we were
crazy.
Yeah. And so, and I was a good old boy, and so we told the line until that priesthood wedding.
Yeah. Great. I mean, it's you said that you had 2 wives, not at the same time?
Yeah, never lived polygamy, but yeah, I've been married twice.
Okay. Awesome. So just rewinding slightly, before I guess you got to the point of marriage, you left school at 13 and went to work at concrete with your uncle. And how many hours a day would you work? What happened to the money? What was life like between starting work and then getting married?
Yeah, absolutely. So we usually started really early, especially in the summer months, as far as starting our day. Sometimes 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. It was pretty common in the heat of the summer. We'd be showing up on the job site at 5:30. He would show up pick us up at like 4:30 in the morning so we could be on the job at 5. And 5:30. That was really common. And we during the summer months was the hours we worked the most, and there were times we didn't get home till like 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, sometimes 10, depending on how busy we had to take care of things that day. And then we had to get up and do that whole cycle again. Lucky for us, during the winter months when it would snow or rain, we usually got a break during those times, and so we'd have days off. If it wasn't snowing, even though it was winter here, he would still get one of those heaters and heat the concrete area. I guess those blowtorches, blowtorch the area so the ground would be warm, and we'd still do concrete in the wintertime. But it wasn't as well. No, not all the money. No, none of the money went to us. It went to my dad. Yeah, we didn't get to keep any of our money. Yeah.
So what did you do with regards to tithing?
So when tithing came around, my dad would just right before. So we'd turn our tithing in at priesthood meeting, and so my dad would just hand us an envelope of whatever amount of money he put in the envelope, and it was cash. And then he'd like, "Okay, this is your tithing for the month."
And would you be? I guess would you tithing record stack up against the kind of, I say, caliber against the wife or wives that you were rewarded with later?
Well, that's a topic that is unspoken. They certainly don't talk about that, but I would say that it seems that men with money tend to get multiple wives. It's not always the case.
Funny that, isn't it?
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
The higher up the priesthood you get.
Yeah, exactly. I will tell you this, that this has been openly discussed by the president of the work, and one of the things he says that when I get inspired about a man getting married, you know what I look at? I go look at his tithing record. And he says, and quite often, my inspiration lines up with that record, and that record just shows that he really is a faithful saint, or a faithful member. Yeah.
That's one way to tout for money, isn't it? Without actually touting for money.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh yeah, he openly says that he looks at the tithing record of the man. He says, if you want a new wife, guess where I'm looking? I'm looking at your tithing record.
Wow. Whoever pops to the top of the spreadsheet gets to go first.
I guess so.
So you left church, you left school at 13, went to work, but what happens to your sisters who were at school with you? Do they stay on at school past 13, or?
Yeah, they stay home. They stayed home. They took care of the house. They got to do school at the house to a point. I was the first one in my household to get a high school diploma. In fact, I was the first one of my grandfather's posterity, and that's a big statement because his posterity is about 1,000 right now. I was the first grandson to get a high school diploma. His kids did. My father got a high school diploma. They went to public school, but I guess the world had gotten more wicked by the time I was born. And so even though they went to public school, got a high school diploma, we weren't allowed to because the world by then has gotten so wicked. So I was the first one of the grandkids of my grandfather's posterity to get that high school diploma. And because of that, the ripple effect is many of my brothers and sisters did the same program and got their high school education. And it rippled out into cousins and also many other fundamentalist communities that followed kind of the same pattern. They went and did it too. And so in a sense, I guess I was a spark by just doing. I wasn't trying to be Spark. I was just trying to get my education. And
hey, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and I'm sure if President Priesthood had the opportunity, he would claim that as a win.
Definitely.
Yeah, he'd have it. So you said that your granddad's posterity is almost at 1,000.
As of 2009, it was 1,000.
1,000. So he's got 12 wives, and then
He's had as many as 15. 3 have died of old age.
Wow. And is that number worn as kind of a badge of honor?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Would they sit around kind of the pecking order around the table at priesthood meeting, and you'd look at the guy who'd hit 1,000 and be like, wow, check you out, Noah?
No, no, it's just one of it's unspoken. It's just one of those unspoken obvious things. One thing about Mormonism is there's so many passive aggressive things happening, and so you could definitely say that was one of them that wasn't directly talked about, but it was kind of like implied, like, yeah, I'm kind of a big deal, you know.
Wow.
But
I think we do that in the mainstream church, but it's more around how many chairs you can carry when you're clearing up afterwards.
Oh yeah, flirting with the
off.
girls by how many chairs? Yes. Oh yeah, we would clear out chairs too. So I'm with you.
Yeah, it's almost like peacocking.
100% peacock. 100% peacocking.
Awesome. So someone's asked an interesting question here, which I think is quite good. Now, Doug Vincent asked, did you have the internet in your home?
Oh yeah, that's a really great question. We didn't have the internet. I don't remember having the internet until I was 18.
Okay. And is it something that your siblings living at home now would have access to?
Yes, because right now they've done a lot of their school online. So yes, they do have access to it now.
And do they find that there's issues with, I guess, some of the information that they might find with regards to church history or?
Yeah. One of the things that sets the work apart from Warren Jeff's version of FLDS is you could consider them far more progressive and far more liberal. And so one of the liberal things is the kids got to have the internet, at 18. They could buy clothes as long as it was anywhere from the store, as long as it was long sleeves and covered up your garments. So that's part of if you might call it, some of the progressive liberal side, if that's even a possibility in such a dynamic. But for whatever reason, the internet wasn't available, and I was closely watched when I was getting on the computer and so forth.
Yeah. And I think back then, I think it was the same for me, but I think my parents were more watching out for porn and things like that rather than church history. But these days, I think that at least in our meetings, they've stopped talking about the evils of pornography and different things, and now they're just talking about the evils of truth found on the internet.
I heard something going around in the ex-Mormon community that the LDS Church says that you can now do soaking, and it's no longer
no what it was. No, it's interesting to get kind of an outsider's view, but soaking was something. It's really old. When I say really old, it's been around for a while, but it just hit kind of the secular community that Mormons, especially in Provo, at BYU, do this thing called soaking, where they treat God like a dinosaur, and they're like, if you don't move, he can't see us. So they get into bed together, and they basically have intercourse, but they don't move around. So the action, the bad thing is not kind of coupling together, it's the moving around. And for me, what's the point? What's the point if you're not going to move around? But then there's something called the Provo jump, where what they do, I don't know how true it is, but what they do is they get into the soaking position and then get one of their friends to jump on the bed next to them, so they're involuntarily moving. And
oh my goodness!
I just think that's what you get if you get enough Eagle Scouts together who really want to have sex.
That's what I call take one for the team. That's funny.
They will find a way.
Yeah.
So being with 1,000, I guess, people coming from your granddad, it is going to be statistically certain that some of those 1,000 will be members of the LGBTQ community. How is that navigated? I guess what is that one of the, because the Mormon church now, or the mainstream Mormon church now, is embracing those people and gaslighting them by saying, we never hated you, we love you, it's a trial that you have to bear. But how does that work from your side of things?
So these guys are, they have no problem addressing this head on. And being gay or being homosexuality in the work is considered a sin. And if you engage in homosexuality with this, then that's the same as fornication, or it goes against all of their teaching, because all the teachings is about God and a woman coming together. And so there's no place for anybody from the LGBT community in the work except repentance.
Okay.
And so you better repent and quit thinking of other guys' buttholes.
Oh my gosh! You know what? This is the place to say it. But, sorry, everyone's just switched off. So the mainstream LDS church are now making a distinction. So in the past, it's always been homosexuality is wrong. Any form of homosexuality is sin, which I think is what I'm hearing is where the work is. But what 100%. They've done is a PR thing over the last 10, 15 years. They've split homosexuality into two camps. Pardon the pun. They've they've gone with same-sex attraction, which is thinking of other guys or girls, depending on where you are, and that's okay. Exactly. And then they've gone to the physical acting upon those feelings, and that's wrong. That's the sin.
Right.
So what they've done is they've pivoted to say, you can stay in the church, you can have a temple recommend, have the priesthood hold a calling, as long as you don't act upon your feelings.
Right.
Is that a distinction that the work makes?
Well, yeah, you certainly can't act on it. So you can be attracted to a guy. A guy can be attracted to another guy, and so forth. But if he wants to be exalted in the celestial kingdom as a god, the only pathway to do that is with being married to a woman or multiple wives.
Do you have to be married? Do you have to be married to those women in this life to be exalted? Do you have to live polygamy on this earth, or can you be exalted by living it in the next life?
Only if it was presented to you as an option, like then yes. But you can, for example, there's been some guys that have died in the work that only had one wife, and they're not gonna. I've heard it at their funerals how they're not going to be robbed of their exaltation, and they'll be able to live polygamy in the next life and all that, because through proxy they can have other women married to them and all that. So yes, it's not an absolute. But if the priests come to you and say, hey, we think you should marry these two girls or these three women, and you say no, you're effectively saying no to one of God's highest principles or one of God's highest laws. So in that effect, then that would be an offense against God to say no to that.
Yeah, it's just more of that reinforcing the arranged marriage and the fact that you really don't have any choice in the matter.
Yeah.
Because it's not
Yep.
just saying no to that, it's what you lose as well. So if you already had several wives and the church came to you, President Priesthood sat you down and said, I know you've already got 50 children, you've got 5 wives, but there's this sister, it's been revealed to me that you need to take this sister on. She's got 15 kids already, and you know the sister, you're really not down with it. You don't need all those extra mouths to feed. You're already struggling. But what's the consequence of you saying no? Other than the eternal consequence that they lay on you, is there any immediate consequence in your community?
Not that I'm aware of, other than they won't call you. They may not ever ask for another woman to ever marry you again. So that's something that could be immediate, that you may forego your opportunity to ever be married again. And so as far as immediately, no, there's no other browbeating, or they may pass you on a calling even. So, because you're not, God is offering you something you're saying no to, so they don't trust you. So
how do callings work in your side of things?
From my understanding, is it goes through everything goes to the top. It's all about the men at the top who make the final decision on the callings. So that would be who we call or called the apostles.
Okay, so what sort of callings for yourself as a 21-year-old married man? What sort of callings would you be given?
There may not be a ton of callings for somebody that young. The callings could be something as simple as, hey, listen, we would like you to come be a teacher at in the priest class, for example. So you might have a calling to teach the priest class at priesthood meeting. It could be, hey, we'd like you to go give sister so-and-so a blessing. Go with you and brother so-and-so, go give sister so-and-so a blessing. One thing that's unique about the work is they don't do any proselyting. So there's no calls to people for missionary work. Although they do have a missionary program, but the missionaries are just serving the local community of Centennial Park right there. Sometimes the missionaries, they'll send them out to go work for 2 years and then turn in all their money that they earned while they were working to the church. So not only, so there is, so they'll spend 2 years of their life working full time, turning in their money. So it's not just tithing, it's all their money. And that's considered, quote, missionary work, end quote. And so those kind of callings can happen.
Those are the ones you want to avoid.
Yeah. And there was some elements to my dad that was somewhat of a rebel. And that was one area where he was a rebel for. He never wanted any of his sons to be missionary. He's like, shit, no, you can just, that's another thing. You can live the United Order with me. You just go and earn your money and turn it into me.
Give me all your money.
You're right. So give it to me instead of the church, that way the money helps the family.
I was going to say, you got that many people to feed. Now here's a good point that Robert makes. Okay. So before we read the question, a bit of background, I guess. I think many of us have heard the story of the church in Utah having an issue with the missionaries in the UK marrying all the pretty girls before they get to the Utah Valley. So they're marrying all these girls and taking them as polygamous wives and then sending them on the wagon train to Utah to wait there for them to come back off their mission. And the population split in the world is pretty much 50-50 men and women. So you'd imagine that if men were having more than one wife, we come to Robert's questions. So what happens when men don't get married because no available women? because those living polygamy have consumed the available women.
That's a real thing. And what we're talking about here is the ecosystem, the ratio of men and women that are born. Like, even though there's polygamy, there's still only about 50% men and 50% girls that are born. I think the ratio is like 47% to 53%. There's like 53% girls and 40%. I think that's like the official number. I'd have to look it up. But so it's in the neighborhood of 50-50. Well, when you start giving a man 2 wives, 3 wives, 4 wives, 5 wives, and so on, it does mess that up. And so what happens is a lot of the young men who get a wife for the first time, it's pretty common that the men are much older. So they try to get the girls married early, which there's a direction I could go into. They hold this class for the girls to try and, it's from 13 to 18. They're holding right now to indoctrinate them on polygamy and so forth. But that's another direction I could talk here in a minute. But what they're doing is, when the boys are usually in their mid-20s and sometimes in their 30s. I have a cousin right off the top of my head right now who's in his early 30s and single. And so
Wow.
the young men just go longer. And keep in mind, they're not supposed to masturbate during all this either.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the men just get older and older, and the president priesthood, he yells at people in church. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
he taught, one of the things he yells at the young men. He says, "You're not waiting on me," yells, and he says, "You're waiting on God," type of thing. And he says, he defines celestial marriage as when God appoints it, whether God's appointing one marriage or multiple marriages. And so they're not going to go to the real root of the problem, and that is, hey, we just married all these girls to the high up muckety mucks. Now our young dudes don't get wives. Then they're going to say, no, you're waiting on God, because God inspired me to marry all these gorgeous 18 and 20-year-olds to the 80-year-old apostles. So
that doesn't happen.
It does, yeah. In fact, I had, I think it was about 2 years ago, I had a first cousin who was 18, and she married an 80-year-old apostle.
Holy!
I'm not making that up.
Oh my!
In fact, yeah. It's common. It's common that men that are it's common that men in their 50s, for example, if they get married again, they already have an established family, and they're quite often marrying women. They're marrying a woman that is younger than some of their own daughters.
You floored me. Just a moment of silence. That's crazy. Sorry. I know it's all very interesting. But that age gap, even today, like
for example, my father and
years.
My wife's dad just took a polygamous wife, and she's younger than my wife, which is his daughter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about ecosystem.
So it throws off the ecosystem.
Yeah. Do they also take into account, I guess, DNA diversity when it comes to intermarrying lines?
They try to, but if God says to do it, it doesn't matter.
Is there any room for a young man and a young woman to get to know one another and then, I guess, go to President Priesthood and ask for his blessing?
They can, and there are instances where that happened. That happened to me in my first marriage, but they frown on it. They don't say it's not the ultimate way to do it. They teach that the ultimate way is for the highest way, which is the God's way, the celestial way, is for the men and the women for the priesthood to have their own inspiration that this girl belongs to this guy, and that none of them did any activities to try and stimulate each other's feelings.
Kind of takes the power away.
They are 100% power. So in other words, principle supersedes love. So love is something that comes later, because submission to authority is more important to love, which part of the things that started unraveling my awakening process was, here they claim to be apostles of Christ, and then I can read in the Bible where Christ is asked, what is the most important thing? And Christ says, all the laws and all the prophecies hinge on love. If you don't have love, you are nothing. Just paraphrasing. And I'm like, I'm not taught that in church.
No.
I'm taught submission to authority comes first, then love comes later.
Pure obedience.
Pure obedience.
So this for me, where my mind goes, I think of myself as a 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, lovesick kind of young man. And when you have that attraction to someone of your own age, and then that girl who you were never, because I'm sure there must have been times when young men and young women were having relationships that were secret, off the books, and then young woman has, say, been given to that young man's grandfather, or
that has happened.
You end up with some kind of adultery, because the relationship. I don't think, maybe I'm prejudging or assuming that the grandfather is going to be able to do everything for that young lady, that kind of make her heart jump and stuff, the way that his grandson did. And you end up with a really difficult situation there.
Yep. Yeah, I do know of some firsthand experiences around that, firsthand incidences around that.
Is there any way to get around that, or they just have to leave together?
Well, there's nothing. If the marriage is final, there's nothing else. There's nothing else to do. It just has to play itself out.
Wow. Now, you spoke about missionary work. Do you get many people, I guess, joining the work to help it grow from outside?
It happens from time to time, but it's extremely rare. It's usually people that join are fascinated by the origins of Mormonism, and also that has something to do with polygamy. But it's extremely rare. You rarely get converts.
Yeah. And I think if you're fascinated by polygamy, there are easier ways to find out what's going on than practicing it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and a lot less inexpensive.
Yeah. So when it comes to getting married, you have the legal wedding, then the priesthood wedding. Now, when in the mainstream Mormon church, when you get married in your priesthood wedding in the temple, beforehand, you've gone through a washing and anointing. You've received your garment. Then you've gone through an endowment where you receive your signs and tokens. And then you have the wedding with both the bride and the groom dressed in the robes of the holy priesthood, and you exchange vows and signs. Is that similar to what they do in the work?
No, they don't have a temple. They don't. It's extremely rare for somebody to even get their first endowment, for whatever reason. So usually, what happens is you might be married in one of the apostles' homes, or you might. In my case, I was married. My first wife, I was married in one of the apostles' house, and my second wife, I was married in my dad's library in his house. So it's generally you're generally married in a home, and there's no ordinance work prior to that. And another thing about when I talked about garments earlier, the garments that the people wear, those are preparatory garments. They're not even the official church garments. And so the garments that I wore were garments that one of my mothers made, and there's also some people in the community or the work that would make. They're called preparatory underwear. It's to prepare you to receive the priesthood underwear, and I wore those faithfully. Yeah. I wore those faithfully, and I never got the church priesthood ones. I remember asking my grandfather about that, and I'm like, I pay my tithing, I obey the commandments, I do everything. I was in my early 20s when I asked him this. And I says, I think I'm ready to get my first endowment and to get the priesthood underwear. And he paused for a moment. He goes, as far as the priesthood and I are concerned, we are in the middle of eternity. So if you have gotten your character to where you can receive them, and if for some reason you don't receive them in this life, you will get them in the next life. Which to me was a big cop out, and the question for me at that time in the back of my head was, well, what's the whole point of the restoration and the point of Mormonism? We're supposed to be able to have it now. And so now you're telling, now I'm getting backpedaled on and saying, no, you may not get it in this life, but no big deal. You can do it. You can get it on the next.
So this preparatory underwear that you had to wear, what was it?
Preparatory. It was white preparatory underwear. It's a one piece long underwear. With a little butt flap, so you can pull the butt flap open to use the potty. And sometimes we could go buy them at a local farmer store, like we have an IFA here, and that would do. And then just one piece that you just put on, and then you have all your regular clothes.
I'm assuming that the priesthood garment that if you advanced it you would get was just the same thing, but with the marks sewn into it.
Yeah, all the signs and the emblems and so forth. But these didn't have any of the signs and emblems, of course. They were just the preparatory underwear.
How many endowments were there within the work?
I was taught that there was 3. There was your first, your second, and then your third is when Christ lays his hands on your head and grants you your eternal salvation and all that.
Yeah, and I think to compare the two next to one another in mainstream Mormonism, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Clayne, but what you were speaking about with regards to your first endowment is the washing and anointing, and where you get your garment. The second endowment in the work is what the mainstream Mormon church would just call the endowment session, where you receive the robes of the holy priesthood, signs and tokens, and then your third endowment, which is now a secret in the mainstream Mormon church, is your call and election being made sure.
Yes.
And we've had some people who've had that and then left the church and told everyone about it. And funnily enough, at least in the mainstream Mormon side of things, Jesus never made an appearance.
Imagine that. I'm surprised they didn't even I'm surprised they didn't even get a proxy Jesus or something. At least
some guy to walk in and be like, I'm here for Jesus.
He could have been with smoke and mirrors, and I'm sure you could have had some Jesus character appear out of the smoke. Dude,
it's like the whole Santa thing at the Christmas party. It's not the real Santa; it's one of Santa's helpers. Just exactly. Like that. It's not the real Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus was busy. He couldn't be here for your salvation ceremony.
Yeah, no, awesome. Okay, I know we're running short on time, but a couple more questions to ask, and then we'll start wrapping up. Someone's asked, what happened with your first wife?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question, Doug. So I was still in the thick of the work at the time, and she didn't want anything to do with it. And so she essentially left, and we ultimately divorced. And then the church arranged another wife for me. And so I had one daughter with my first wife, and she actually died 4.5 years ago from she had some kind of issue in her brainstem, and it burst, and it actually took her really quick. So yeah, that's what happened.
Okay, no fun. So starting to wrap up now. From your side of things, or from the mainstream Mormon side of things, when we look at polygamous sects like the FLDS, we kind of look down on them. Speaking for myself, we look down on them as being backwards, living a sinful kind of polygamous lifestyle, and that's all kind of worldly and it's wrong, that prophets and apostles have said that we don't need to do that anymore. But do you think the same, kind of looking back over the fence at us, that we're wrong because we've lost this massive kind of main teaching of the church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So growing up, the opinion of the LDS Church, the stance was they couldn't handle Father the Priesthood, and so they got Mother the Church, and so they got that's how my grandfather used to say it. They couldn't handle Father the Priest, so they got Mother the Church, and so the church could only handle milk toast, and they couldn't handle the meat of the celestial law of plural marriage.
So yeah,
that's how they look at it.
Yeah, so you're up there as being.
Oh yeah, we're the true ones. Yeah, we're God's chosen ones, and all those millions of LDS Mormons, they're just apostates following an apostate church.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, 100%. So I know that you've seen on the Priesthood Dispatches page this week the church apologists who just visited the UK from the mainstream Mormon church.
That was unfucking believable. Yeah, sorry for the swear word.
No, it's fine. Because I think the mainstream church have now got to the point where they accept Joseph Smith and Brigham Young's polygamy and everything.
Yep.
And they kind of say, well, it was all kind of really messy. And yeah, we just don't do that anymore. So let's not talk about it.
Yep.
So
yeah. Want me to comment on what he just said?
Yeah, let's. Because I saw your comment on the page, and you basically said the same thing. That's unfucking believable. But why?
Okay, because it felt like watching it. It felt like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. They would get rid of those two characters if they could.
Yeah.
It's almost like they dirty our bathwater. Is kind of the feeling, and we would love to just see those two go away. That was one aspect of it. The other aspect that I thought was unfucking believable was Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. That was a foundational teaching to Mormonism, and how they shy away from it is absolute cowardice to what Mormonism was really founded on.
Yeah.
And so I really do feel like, and I really want to say this, if you're going to do something, I think you need to do it all the way and with a full amount of integrity. That's what I've come to. And as I personally have stepped into integrity, that's why I'm no longer a Mormon. I'm like, no, it's not for me. But if you're going to step inside the full integrity of what Mormonism teaches, the foundation, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, you cannot bullshit yourself about polygamy. Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, John Taylor, they all talked about it as a cornerstone to your salvation. And so to shy away from it like how they've done is cowardice to the very thing that you're trying to say you're living to exalt yourself.
Yeah. I genuinely think, as you said, if they could, they would take everything, not everything, but a lot of the things that Joseph taught about polygamy, about some of the treasure digging, things like that, and they would put it down the memory hole so far that we'd never find it. Doug said as well, as we mentioned earlier, they buried the fact that Brigham Young taught the Adam God. And I think if you spoke to the majority of younger members of the mainstream Mormon church today and mentioned Adam God, then they wouldn't.
Doug, you're absolutely correct.
About.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. They need to pull out the Journals of Discourses, one of the forbidden books, the books that's forbidden by the LDS Church, and it's hot and heavy inside the Journals of Discourse.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets, but that's where the true church. I say the true church. That's where the real church is, because what we have today is just a polished PR version.
Oh, 100%, 100%. They'd be so unpopular. Like if they really taught straight up Mormonism, they would be teaching polygamy, they'd be teaching the United Order, and they would be excommunicating anybody who acts on any homosexuality. They'd just cut them off, and they'd be open about it. And so if you're really the true church of God, then why don't you be bold motherfuckers and stand on what the founders did? And here's what will happen is you'll find out how big of a piece of shit it is if you do that.
Oh my gosh, I love you, Clayne. Why don't you be bold motherfuckers? You are it's so true though. Like, at least on one side of it, you were living, what the church was, and you could say, look, I'm a Mormon and I'm living what Mormonism is and was. Whereas on this other side of it, it's more, I've got a card because I'm a member of this business, and I feel really good about being a member of this business because we've got all this money, and it applies to my sensitive kind of sensibilities about living morally and different things. But yeah, it's total bullshit, the way that they just jettison everything that the church was. Oh, we've lost your sound. No, we've lost you. Just whilst Clayne deals with that, this has been a fantastic interview. I think, not from my side of things, from Clayne's side of things. We're so grateful that he's come to talk to us, because no, still can't hear you. Because the community that he's stepped outside of now would be are so much more militant, maybe, in the way that they live their gospel and the way that they live their lives, that when someone does leave, it's much more of a physical separation. I think we've got you back, Clayne.
How about, you can hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, I heard everything you had to say. I agree. What I wanted to say is this, before we close this, is if integrity ever becomes important to someone's life, you'll find out that Mormonism will not live on that rock. It will crumble very quickly on the rock of pure integrity.
Yeah.
And what I find very interesting is the people that stay inside Mormonism is they have to break the Mormon integrity to make it look better. Like, to stand inside the integrity of what the founders taught, you're gonna look like a freaking moron. You're gonna look like, who the hell are you? Like one of the big things that I talk about is, like, if you have apostles that talk to God, this is not me being angry at these people. If you have apostles that talk to God, then why are you so behind on all the social movements? Wouldn't you be leading social movements instead of waiting to where it becomes so ridiculous that, oh yeah, we actually ought to embrace our LGBT community? You know what I mean? It's
Why are you 20 years behind the ball?
Right.
And it's so obvious that that's the case as well. But I genuinely think it's down to the age of these people leading the church. You imagine now the mainstream Mormon church has a President Nelson, who's 97. Yeah. So he grew up in a polygamous kind of environment. He grew up where men still had polygamous wives. They didn't take new ones, but his progenitors were polygamous, and he would have seen his grandfather with polygamous wives, maybe his father, I'm not sure. And he grew up in a time when being gay was illegal, and you go to jail, and people were killed over their sexuality. And you're telling me now that with that grounding, he can now look objectively and not feel like he's relinquishing his childhood, his whole upbringing, by bringing the church forward on the issue. I just think when one dies, maybe the next one becomes a little more progressive, and so on. But it's a flawed system if you have to wait for the guy at the top to die before we can accept human, just something that people can't change about themselves. So,
yep.
But amazing. Thank you so much, Clayne. We could have gone on for a lot longer, but it's Thanksgiving and Clayne has a family to go and be with. So we're going to let him go in just a second. Happy Thanksgiving. I forgot to say at the beginning, being in the UK, unfortunately, we don't get to eat our turkey until December 25th, which is fake Jesus' birthday. But something to mention on fake Jesus' birthday is the Priesthood Dispatchers War Christmas Party, which will be taking place here on the Priesthood Dispatchers channel on the 21st of December. That's a Tuesday evening, 7:30 UK time. But if you're unable to attend the live stream, then that's okay. We'll be having competitions where you can enter before, and we'll judge and announce the winners during the party. It'll be here with the Brit Bengers, and you will hear more about it on the channel going forwards. But something else even better than that is Vesper Life. This is Clayne's website, and this is Clayne. So if you want to hear more about his story, he's got a book that is currently being edited called Echoes of Resounding Love, which is Clayne's biography, where he goes through. We've just scratched the surface. I'm looking forward to this book coming out in 2022, so we can go through that with him, and maybe even if you've got time, Clayne, get you back to and we can do a book review. And I'm looking forward to that.
That would be amazing. All right.
But if you do want to know more, head over to Clayne's website, vasperlife.com, where there's just more of the amazing insights and just truth, straight up truth and straight speaking that we've had in the last hour. So awesome. Absolutely. Okay. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for your messages in the chat. Clayne, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate the opportunity, awesome. Petey.
No, that's great. And we'll see you next week. Everyone stay safe and happy Thanksgiving for yesterday. See ya.